Welcome to Peace Now. My name is Trudy Quaife. I'm a member of Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. We're a local organization of friends and neighbors, and we've been advocating for peace and justice for well over a decade. I'm your host today, and I'm joined by David Easter.
Nice to be here, Trudy.
Thank you for being here. David is a Quaker activist. He spent his working career working for various peace and justice organizations. He's now retired, and he's an active member of the Upper Hudson Peace Action.
Peace Action is a national peace group, and they have chapters across the country, and Upper Hudson Peace Action is the local chapter. So, and the Upper Hudson Peace Action has been working for about 30 years in the Capital District on nuclear disarmament, on work against the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and now Syria and the Palestine, Middle East issues. We work on trying to end conflict.
Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit more about Upper Hudson Peace Action in a few minutes. So let's start talking a little bit about your background. How did you start out in activism?
I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, and I grew up in a solidly Republican family. My grandparents on both sides were Republicans, my parents were Republicans, and I didn't have too strong a political identity as a child or growing up, but during the Kennedy-Nixon debates, I was convinced Nixon had clearly won the debate. So this was when I was, that would have been 59, high school age. And when I was in college years, this was during the early 61 to 65, and it was a time of the civil rights movement. People were starting to talk about this war in a distant place, Vietnam, and it was a time of many young people my age starting to. We thought it was thinking for ourselves. I think that's what we were doing. We were taking another look at the world and how we thought about it, and my views started to change. And the result was that over time I became a social activist on the left side of the political spectrum. So I was concerned about anti-war issues, issues of racism, support for the women's liberation movement as that became active in the 70s, and lesbian and gay rights issues was a concern for me going along, and also on human rights and foreign policy issues. And I had kind of an unusual life up to now, and I'm hoping to continue to have this unusual life on a journey working with activist groups. All through my working career, I was a staff person for small community-based peace and social justice groups. So most people who are activists or who take part in advocating for change in our society, they're not doing it as a staff person. They have other jobs. They're a teacher or a mechanic or a lawyer or a nurse or something else, and then they do their speaking out on issues on the side. But for me, I felt very fortunate and feel very fortunate that I've been all through the years was able to have this role as a staff role.
I know you worked for the Friends Service Committee. What are some of the other organizations that you worked for?
I did work for the American Friends Service Committee as a young person in Syracuse, New York. I was a peace intern, and I did work. It was a very odd situation. I decided and realized I was a conscientious objector, and I had been in seminary, religious seminary, Union Theological Seminary, for a year, and then decided I didn't want to become a clergyman, which had been my path for a number of years, thinking that that's what I might want to do. And I left the seminary and was immediately faced with, okay, would I go into the draft was there, and would I go into be a soldier, and realized that in fact no, that wasn't something I could do. So I did file for conscientious objector status, and a conscientious objector, instead of doing military service, was obligated to do 2 years of volunteer service, or service when a job that was doing something for society. And I found a job. I thought, well, I had to find a job that would fit, and I thought, well, what I want to do is peace work. I was totally naive. I just thought, okay, the draft board's going to assign me to do anti-war organizing, because that fit with my beliefs, and it actually worked out. I found Quakers had AFSC as a Quaker organization, and they had had a position. They had a number of these around the country, peace interns, and they often were filled with conscientious objectors at that time. And so that's what I did, and I did work. The main project I worked on as I got going was trying to help set up or help people set up staffed peace centers in various communities around upstate New York. And I was living in Syracuse at the time, but I remember traveling over to Albany and meeting with people who were already Quakers and others who were concerned about the Vietnam War, and talking about the idea that you could have a peace center that had staff and a place to keep your literature and to have your meetings, and to where people could come and talk to somebody about their feelings about the war. And Peace Center was set up in the Quaker Meeting House on Madison Avenue.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
So, and then there were others around the state. So that was the first job for me, and then for about 5 years I worked as a staff person for the Syracuse Peace Council, which is a community peace group.
Yeah, very well known.
And this was during the period, this would have been 68 to 72 or 74, 73, and it was a time that the opposition to the Vietnam War was really building up in terms of mass protests and all the mobilizations and in big demonstrations in Washington, and the period during the Kent State time when there were the campuses. Quite a lot of people got involved in peace activities, so it was an exciting time, and it was a time of a lot of this work. If you're working against war, people have been working against war for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, and we still have wars, and so it can be pretty discouraging. But you get some periods like that you feel we're making progress, which we were in terms of the change of public opinion,
and ending the Vietnam War.
And ending the Vietnam War. My wife Maud Easter and I moved to Portland, Oregon, because of a job that she got, and I shifted gears somewhat at that time. The feminist movement was important in our marriage, and for us personally. I'd been in a men's support group that was looking at feminism and how it impacted our men's lives in Syracuse, and when we went out to Portland, I was trying to think, what am I going to do? And so I started talking to the men I met about forming an organization of both gay and straight men who would work in support of the women's liberation movement. And this was a group, it was named the Men's Resource Center, and we had a publication that went out across the country called Changing Men.
Wow.
We were looking at the ways that the traditional male role not only hurt women but hurt men in terms of emotional expressiveness and men's communication and men's sense of confidence with their partners, and in terms of living with somebody, a fully equal partner.
Wow, I'm very much impressed.
So anyway, that was something that was important to me at that time, so that I was staffing a group. Now this is a little group, but it involved raising money and trying to get funds in for it. Then Maud and I had a job working with the American Friends Service Committee as Quaker International Affairs representatives living in Tokyo, Japan, and working on trying to lift up the problems in South Korea and North Korea. It was a time of very dictatorial governments on both sides of the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. was so involved in South Korea with troops. We still are, and we're supporting these pretty miserable governments.
Yeah.
North Korea has a dictatorship also, but the U.S. had absolutely no dialogue with North Korea. And so we worked to organize the first Quaker delegation to North Korea also.
Well, that was in the late 70s?
This was late 70s, yeah. 1977 to 80 we were there.
So did you go to North Korea?
We did, yes. Our trip to North Korea was viewed, we were the first sort of NGO type group to visit that wasn't a left sectarian group like the Communist Party or the Socialist Workers' Party, or there were various left sectarian groups that had delegations to visit North Korea. And there had been some reporters, American reporters, who had gone to visit North Korea. But we were the first, and AFSC is a religiously tied organization, so the first religiously tied organization to go. I'm saying religiously tied because it's not specific, it's a service organization, but it's led by Quakers.
Okay.
And we went to North Korea, and our basic message coming back was saying, we might not like everything about the government. In fact, you could just see the sort of all the personality cult around Kim Il-sung, the leader. It was hard for Americans and for us to accept as a good thing, and having a very top-down society. It's not the kind of society we'd want to see. But ordinary people live in North Korea, lived then, and live now. So these are people who have children that they love and who go to school when they're growing up, and they find jobs that they need to do.
Yes.
And so they're living ordinary lives, and that their lives are valuable as human beings, just like any human being on the planet, their life. And so viewing North Korea totally as an enemy state, as though everything about it is bad, which is mostly how the stories about North Korea were, and to a large extent still remain that way. This was the message you wanted to come back with and say, now wait a minute.
They're just like us.
Yeah, they're just like us. And well, what does that mean? Then it means that the United States should be treating North Korea like other countries.
Right.
Even if there's another country that is enemy of the enemy of the United States. At that time, Russia or China. We had diplomatic relations, we had meetings, we had official U.S. delegations, and trade and other types of, because that's your only hope, is to build on those type of things, because the military confrontation doesn't lead to better communication and doesn't lead to a peaceful situation. So we need to treat North Korea that way. Unfortunately, even today, the basic stance towards North Korea is economic boycott and very, very limited governmental. There's been some progress. There is U.S. dialogue on a diplomatic level, off and on, with North Korea, but it isn't normal at all yet.
Do you think there's any hope that it will change?
It needs to change, and I think it will eventually. You have to ask, why has North Korea remained this enemy country for so long? And what I believe, and you could view it as a very cynical belief, but I think we have many, many thousands of troops, tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers stationed in Japan, in South Korea. We used to have them in the Philippines. Now we're starting to send them back to the Philippines. You have to have an enemy, a reason to have those troops. And we haven't been willing to say that we're having all those troops to encircle China. So we need some enemy. And if you actually look at it, all our security relations and the justification for these bases, it's the threat of North Korea.
And they really
The
vilified
war.
North Korea, yeah.
And it's almost like I believe the United States established a military establishment and the State Department must believe we need that enemy. We don't want to
And rather than
change.
admit that China may be more of a potential target.
Right. That now, then we should deal with that
Yeah,
separately.
yeah. Okay,
Okay. Well, anyway, that's my pitch on North Korea.
okay. Well, now I know you and Maud have traveled extensively throughout the world, and I just wondered, what have you learned? What's the benefit of your travel, and how do you see things differently because of all the places you've been?
I think we tend to, as when you're living here in this country, you look at everything through the lens of we're the United States, and you look at everything from the United States perspective, and you lose track of that not everybody in the world thinks exactly the way we do here. And I just think if you travel and talk to people and meet people from other countries, your perspective broadens out, and you start to think, well, some people in some other country might be doing something better than we are here. Then there are other cases where we do things better. But anyway, I just think it's a broadening.
Okay. Shall we talk a little bit about Upper Hudson Peace Action?
Yes, let's let's do that.
What are you working on now?
Okay. Well, let me just say this. I was doing a little after we were in Japan. We came back. I just want to
Oh yeah,
talk a
let's
little bit
continue
about
with
this.
that.
I just want to fit
Right.
peace action in that context, because I'm thinking linearly here. Coming back from working on issues of North Korea and South Korea, Maud and I started a group in the Capital District called the Committee for a New Korea Policy. We wanted to change U.S. policy towards Korea. And for about 15 years, I worked staffing that group. Maud did for a while, and then she went on to other things. And so that was a group that worked with Korea-concerned groups around the United States to do public education about U.S. foreign policy towards Korea. So that was a satisfying way to work with Korean Americans and others around the country who shared this concern. After that, I spent about 15 years working with another group that I started called Campus Action. This was a time in my life when I don't have children. Maud and I don't have children, and if I had children, they would have been about college age. And I formed a group that was working to strengthen activism on campuses, and I was working with students who were involved with the peace group, or a group concerned about racism, or the feminist group on campus. And we have about 10 large campuses in the Capital District, and the Campus Action over time worked on all of them, some one year more than another. But I was able to work with some of the most idealistic kids on campus, which was wonderful, because young people are
the future.
see things clearly. They're the future, and we need for our social change movement, we need young people coming along all the time. Then following working with Campus Action, I again wanted to shift gears. I don't know how you are, but for me, after a number of years, whether it's 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, working with an organization, I feel like I've given it about what I can, and I'm starting to just repeat myself, or I'm not. So by changing to another group,
a different perspective.
Even though for most of this time I had my office at the Social Justice Center in downtown Albany on Central Avenue, and I just kept the same desk and worked for a different organization. But I started staffing Upper Hudson Peace Action, and I did that for about 5 years before I retired. Peace Action is one of the peace groups in the Capital District. It's a sister organization with Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. We have speakers, we have demonstrations and vigils, we have over time, quite a variety of different types of activities, conferences and so on.
So now you're continuing to work with them.
And I'm retired. That's the main group I'm working with right now as a volunteer. I'm on our governing group. The board is called the steering committee, and we meet monthly and make our plans for what we're going to do. And I'm on that committee, but I'm not doing it on a day-to-day. I might many days do something for Peace Action, but I'm not. I'm in the volunteer mode now.
Which is a little different.
Well, it's a little different. It's in some ways it's very nice because if you're a staff person, what you're doing is trying to mobilize a lot of volunteers. Most groups that are working to change our society for the better, from their point of view, may have paid staff, may have a budget of some sort, but they depend on individuals giving some of their time to advance the work of that organization. And most people who are active with a group, with Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace or with Upper Hudson Peace Action or one of our environmental groups in our community, they have other things in their life, family responsibilities, jobs. They can't do this,
put the time in
that much, but they might be able to. There'd be a certain core of people who might be able to put in 10 hours a week working on some aspect, maybe working on the newsletter of the organization, or on heading up one of the projects. Maybe a speaker's coming to town and they might work on helping organize that. Well, but that's only a few people. Most people they'll show up occasionally to a major event. They'll come to a dinner that the group is holding. They'll get their checkbook out and send in a check, which actually is very, very important. If you don't have the money, groups can't function. So I think if people want to say, how can I be involved? At the very basic level, looking at your giving.
Yes, we're down to only 3 minutes left.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How could somebody get involved?
How could somebody get involved?
Okay. If you wanted to learn more about Upper Hudson Peace Action, if you just went to your computer and Googled Peace Action Albany, up would come the website of Peace Action. There'd be an email address you could look at. The same would be for Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. You'd put Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. I think I tried that.
Same thing.
You don't have to put anything else, just Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. And up would come the website. Women Against War, another local peace group, could do the same thing. Anybody who, people who are concerned about our society are often concerned about many issues. I am about the environment, global warming, about right now mass incarceration is a big issue.
Yes.
The wars, ongoing war in Syria and Iraq is a big issue. The discrimination of various kinds in our society. You can't do it all as one person. You can't solve all these problems. But if you're working with other people, you can have an impact. And you can't work on all of these issues, you have to find some group to work with that you want to put your energy into.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to make a choice. And if you make that choice and you do some work with Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace or one of the climate change groups, and you're working away, you can feel good about yourself. And you can think, I'm doing something, and I'm dealing with this overwhelming issue. It seems like we'll never be able to solve it, but I'm one of the people who's standing up and saying something.
That's important.
And that's self-satisfaction for you. And then you feel, I'm doing this, and I can count on other people to be working on some of these other issues.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I'll send some money to the environmental group that I'm not putting most of my time into, and I'll show up for some of their events, but I don't have to do the day in and day out work. I'm just picking one little group, and I'm going to work away with that, and I'm going to count on other people all across the country. There are peace groups all over the world. And we have to count on those people too.
To do their part.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Well, you're an inspiration to me and to many other people. I think it's really so impressive what you have done with both your working life and your retirement. We're down to the wire here. Do you have any last words you'd like to give people in terms of getting involved?
I would say if you, I think I just said it, you need to take a step. If you're not involved, you probably know somebody, or you know the sister of somebody or somebody's cousin who's involved in some group, and it isn't hard to find out more about those groups if you want to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, David Easter, and I hope you'll come back again because there's so much more we could talk about.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your being here today. And thank you all for joining us. And please join us for future shows where we'll talk more about drones and how war affects both our local and our national economy. Thank you.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our parents, our children home, from the dust of Afghanistan back to our arms, bring them home.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our sons and our daughters home, from the ghettos of Baghdad back to our arms, bring them home.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our brothers, our sisters home, from Nasiriyah back to our arms, bring them home.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our friends and our neighbors home, from the Kuwaiti desert back to our arms, bring them home.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our soldiers, our peace.